what are we going to cover today? What we want to talk about is the kind of behaviours that really help a charities board to have a well-run, strong, resilient charity that is able to do the things that it was set up to do and to weather the difficulties that do sometimes arise for all charities. And we want to talk about the behaviours that help a charities board work effectively, but we'll also talk a bit about the flip side of that. What happens when those behaviours aren't there, where we get behaviours that are difficult to cope with, that are counterproductive, or that just don't help run the charity in the way that it needs to be run. One thing we particularly want to cover is what are the really good behaviours that all trustees, all trustees is the key phrase there, all trustees should have and should be showing when they're managing the charity's money. And how do we get away from that sense that that's the treasurer's job rather than being everyone's job? And how do you manage to get all charity trustees involved in that? So what we're going to do, I'm going to do the kind of boring bit. I'm going to talk to you about the principles and the general points there. Neil is going to do the interesting bit, and he's going to tell you some stories. He's going to talk to you about some of the cases that he's been involved in, where we've looked at particular charities, where there have been ups and downs in terms of how the charity trustees had gone about their business. And what he'll do is try and draw out some of the learning from those kind of instances, those kind of cases. In a way, what are we doing here? We're the regulator. What do we know about being a charity trustee? Why is it we should be telling you top tips for governance? After all, this is the stuff that we're here for. This is the law. This is the trustee duties. A charity trustee has to act in the interests of the charity. They need to operate in a manner that's consistent with the charity's purpose. They need to act with the, well, if we simplified it there, act with the care and diligence expected of a person managing the affairs of another person. So surely that's enough. But we just operate that. It doesn't quite work like that. Those are very, very wide principles, very wide categories. And we get a lot of calls, emails from people, we get a lot of concerns from charity trustees or people involved with charities, asking what that means essentially. What should we do? We're in this particular situation. What should we do? And I think we need to acknowledge that just coming back and saying, oh, well, you need to act with care and diligence. Okay, but what does that mean here? And I suppose what we're involved with here is trying to sort of sketch in some of the gaps. We are not the only people, and in some cases not the right people to do that. There are lots of great people out in the sector who have a lot of experience with this. There's the Third Sector Interface Network, there's SCBO, there's all sorts of umbrella bodies who can advise on what this means in the context of particular kinds of charity. But what we want to do is try and bridge the gap between the law and how it works day to day, if we can, and to work with other people doing that. Why are we into that? Well, we just launched a new set of regulatory priorities a little while ago. We had an event along in Stirling. I think there was some folks here today who were at that one. Got a bunch of regulatory priorities, but one of the big ones here is to look at how we improve charity trustees' understanding of core governance matters. What we get from our postbag, what we hear in calls every day is that people need help. They're taking on new trusteeships, they're starting up new charities, and they want to know what we think of particular situations. It isn't always for us to say that. We aren't always the right people in some ways. That there are situations where we shouldn't say anything. But we want to work with trustees, with people in the sector who advise charities to try and help that issue. And the other one that we are seeing increasingly, and we're not the only ones, our colleagues down in England and Wales have this issue as well. I think there's a couple of seats down the front here if you want. Our colleagues in England and Wales have this problem as well. We see increasing instances where either within charities we have conflict between trustees, and staff, between trustees and volunteers, between trustees and beneficiaries and staff, all the combinations there. This is something that Neil and his team are dealing with day by day. And those can be very, very difficult to deal with. And we want to, again, work with the sector to try and help trustees on, sector players, help to deal with and minimize and avoid and contain those kind of conflicts. So what are the things that help? Starting at the beginning, when you start being a trustee, what are the things that make that go well, that will make your trustee journey go well right through your period as a trustee? And I think it's about sticking close to what makes this a great sector, and that is the commitment, the commitment that people have to what their charity does, the reason why people set up charities. The distinctive thing about this sector is that sense of mission. And it goes well for charities when the trustees share that sense of mission, where it's really sort of internalized. That's what they're there for. They know what they're there for. It goes well when trustees want to help, when they want to make a difference, and they know how to make a difference. And something that came up in the poll there a couple of times, when trustees know what they have to contribute, what is it that they bring to the charity, is whether it's expertise, whether it's lived experience of what the charity is doing, whether it's particular skills, in money or digital or whatever it might be, or whether it's just a strong commitment to the cause. Strong relationships with the community that they serve, whether that's a local community, whether it's a community of interest or whatever it is. Strong, which means not just one way, or it means able to weather some difficulties. And that sense of ownership. This is my thing. I'm committed to it. There's a flip side to that, but I think you do need it. You do need that to a level for a charity to run well. And those are the things that make it a very strong sector. So that's the flip side of that. When does it go less well? It goes less well when you have people who are not sure why they're there as trustees. And the classic thing is, I came on the board because someone asked me to. My next door neighbor really needed someone to sit on the board. Or I'm here because he's my pal, and I just do what he tells me. That's what we have in mind when we talk about soft puppets. Or sleeping trustees, where they're there to make up the numbers. They're there to tick a box on the forms, but they don't turn up at meetings. I think it goes less well when that sense of ownership flips over and becomes unhealthy, where that sense that it's my charity means it's my charity and not yours, and where that can really curdle sometime. And I mean, none of these things we're talking about are done from anything malign. They're not done out of self-interest. They are just the flip side of the things that can make a charity great. What the big one is where that sense of mission makes it difficult for trustees to make hard decisions because they're so committed to what they're doing. They can't stand back and think about what needs to be done to make that continue, even when those decisions are hard, where they can't compromise either with their fellow trustees or with the other people involved in charity, or where they're so committed and so have such a sense of ownership that it becomes hard for them to work with the community that they serve. So those are the things to avoid. Then going straight to the other end, and again, this is something that I think came up in the poll. What about the end of being a trustee? And I think one of the sort of lessons that we have very much from the casework we do, the queries we get, it's that sometimes the best gift that you can give the charity that you're a trustee of is knowing when it's time to go, is knowing when the charity has got too big for your skills, for the level of time that you're able to put in. And that was a point that someone made in the poll as well, that sense of how much it involves when you can't commit to the level that you want to commit anymore. We talk about founder syndrome. I mean, that's a very wide net. But if we unpack that a bit, it's the sense that I was instrumental in starting this, which can be true. It can't be done without me. I am the public face of it, or I am the person that keeps this thing going, or you can't decide that without me. And it, there's a real art to be able to stand back from that and to know when ensuring the charity is resilient, can move on, can grow, can change, needs you to maybe move aside and let people with different skills or different mindsets move on. And I will hand over to Neil now. You get a different voice, and we'll talk about how some of that works out in real life.
Thanks, Martin, and morning, everyone. When I was trying to come up with two examples for inquiries we've done, to what I'm using that word, that's the word from the legislation when we basically ask questions or want information from a charity. I tried to pick a couple of examples that were smaller charities. So both the charities are incomes less than 25,000 or was in their first year. So I wanted to give you an example, but they don't have a lot of staff, they don't have a lot of support, so perhaps there's more emphasis on the trustees in terms of they don't have sort of backup and staff they can turn to. So the first case was a gymnastics club. I was open 7 days a week for different age groups and abilities. Obviously an indoor facility, hit a little bit with COVID in 2020, 2021, had to sort of pivot a little bit how they operated. So the issues from the concern that were brought to us initially was the applicant and founder had been a charity trustee since charitable status was awarded in 2016 and was also the paid full-time manager. There had been no new charity trustees in the past 5 years, and that both charity trustees were not legally connected in terms of the act to the founder, were basically both friends of the founder. In correspondence with the charity trustees, it was quite clear they didn't know an awful lot about their charity trustee duties or what it meant being a charity trustee. There'd been no formal meetings as such from the charity, only informal WhatsApp conversations and Facebook Messenger, both. And we see that quite a lot actually, worryingly, and the minutes are not recorded and it's informal chats. At the same time, their annual return and accounts on the Scottish Charity Register is also, I think, at least 2 years overdue. So in our first meeting, we met with the charity trustees, and it was actually on Teams, and we're starting to do that a lot more since COVID, and it's quite a useful resource for us, because you can imagine if we cover all of Scotland, travelling about to meet charity trustees in person can be quite an expensive business when you get out from the central belt. So we're starting to use Teams more and more, and it's quite a useful resource for us to get our outreach sort of further out without spending too much on travel costs. So in our first meeting over Teams, we obviously made sure they had a copy of the Constitution. It was clear that none of the charity trustees really knew what the Constitution stated. The founder had a little bit more knowledge, but I would say that one of the trustees had never seen the document and perhaps didn't actually know what the term meant, which is a bit of a worry. Like I said, there was no minutes of any meetings for the trustees, just chats. They said they chatted every day, but when questioned about, so have you had any meetings as per the Constitution, there was no documents to show that, so they couldn't justify any decisions were being made. They were quite keen during our meeting to say they'd been hit quite hard with COVID, so obviously they were used to operating in a centre, they had to pivot to doing YouTube videos, not so many sort of classes, more fitness stuff for the participants, so they were quite keen to tell us that really hit the charity quite hard during that time, and we understand that as well, but obviously this charity dates back to 2016. They had no policies or procedures in place. After that discussion, we signposted them to various documents that would be useful. We made, in terms of templates for trustee meetings, policies that would be useful. We made a number of recommendations to them with the plan to visit them within 3 months' timescale at their premises to see how they got on with putting our recommendations into force. So the follow-up meeting in their premises, I've never been to gymnastics centre before, so that was quite interesting. I was quite pleased to see they'd made quite a lot of progress in terms of creating policies and procedures. They got some help from their national body, who had templates available for them to use. They'd also held 2 charity trustee meetings in that 3-month period, and they'd also arranged their AGM, which they'd never had before either. So that was, they'd made some good progress with that. We had asked them to contact their local third sector interface for some help with charity trustee training, with creating an induction pack, and also to try and bring some more charity trustees on board, which we were a little reluctant to do. One of the reasons we were keen to that, they were operating with the bare minimum, really, for the quorum and the size of the charity. The charity, when it started off, had an income of sub 25,000 in the first year. It was up to nearly 175, 200,000. It was getting a little bit much for 3 charity trustees to run themselves. We were quite keen to increase the resilience of the charity trustees as a collective. It was too much of, I don't want to say a struggle for them, but at times nobody could step back. They had to go to every single meeting. The founder herself admitted that a family bereavement meant that she had to take a step back for 6 weeks, which had a bit of an impact on the activities the charity was carrying out. We advised them to manage their social media appropriately. So we see this a little bit where obviously Facebook can be quite a useful tool for charities. But sometimes when looking at the feeds, we question why a post is put up. So for instance, they were advertising private businesses. So joiners, plumbers, catering companies. And we were like, so why are you advertising them? It only came to light that those companies have provided cut price services or did work for them on a free. So as a thank you, they posted. And I advise the charity that if you're doing that, just put a little comment. These guys did a great work for us. You should maybe use them. Rather than putting up the comment posts for private businesses. Just make it clear to people why you're doing that. We tried to emphasise to the charity and the founder that charity is not one person. And what happens if that charity trustee has to leave, retire, get a new job, a life event, there has to be some sort of succession. It can't be just the same people forever, especially as it grows. You get more service users, you get more people that depend on the charity. And trying to emphasise that point, try and advertise the charity trustees, it's not just one person. Pleased to say that any return and accounts are also up to date now. So after a little chat on how to use OSCR Online, just to let anybody know, we've slightly changed our system in July last year. So if you haven't realised that, I can have a little chat about that. Again, further, sorry, put on to the next one. Further sale recommendations going forward, again, trying to encourage them to get more charity trustees. And increase the scope of the governance to try and have an induction pack. I think one of the reasons they were struggling to get charity trustees on board is they had no, rather just advertising, they had no sort of induction or training. So even if they were to get somebody on board, that person would have no sort of starting point. So we were quite keen for them to do that.
Great, thanks, Neil. Yeah, and it's interesting just how many of the points that I covered, but also that you came up with in the poll there came up as part of that case. And I suppose a couple of reflections there. One is just, I think that's quite typical in terms of what happens when we have an inquiry. Quite often we will work with bodies in the sector, whether it's umbrella bodies, whether it's the local TSI, to help the trustees deal with the issues that they've got. And I think that's quite typical that trustees will often do that. If you run into problems, it isn't game over. There are ways of turning it around and doing the things that you need to do. One of those things, again, you brought it up in the poll, but I will not apologise for being boring about it. Know your constitution. It sounds like the most boring thing you could possibly say, but I talked about the number of calls, emails that we get every year from charities and charity trustees. A proportion of those calls and emails will be saying, do you have a copy of our constitution? We don't have a copy of our constitution. Could you send us a copy of our constitution? And we do that. But it's not just a dry document. It is the place that says what you're there to do. It is the place that says what you can do and what you can't do. And you can't busk it forever without looking at what your constitution says. Eventually, you will run into trouble. You won't be able to accommodate conflicts within the charity in particular without having a good knowledge and a sort of acceptance and a willingness to work with your charity's constitution. So that's one of the big takeaways there. In terms of running your charity, again, pulling from Neil's example, it works well when charity trustees are present in every sense. That's, yes, they do turn up to meetings, because that doesn't always happen, but also when they're at meetings, they are switched on, they've read the paperwork, they're taking notice of what's going on, they're involved as much as they should be. It works well when charity trustees work together. What that means is a lot more complicated than it sounds, and we come to that whole point about collective responsibility and be harping on about that a bit. You share, as charity trustees of a charity, you share those duties. You share that duty to act in the interests of the charity. You can delegate responsibilities. You can give people particular jobs to do. Can you go and run this event? Can you go and prepare the accounts or whatever it is? But the responsibility, the overall duty, sits with you all. And that can be quite a complicated thing to get hold of. What I think isn't necessarily complicated, but it does fall down sometimes, is just keeping good order, having meetings when your constitution says you ought to have them, having a clear agenda, recording decisions, knowing who said what, and record, especially when it gets tricky, recording what the process is for taking that decision, so that everyone knows, because it's hard to be collectively responsible for something that no one quite knows what it is. So clarity is king there. And a key thing there in terms of collective responsibility is accountability. And it goes well when trustees are accountable to each other. Trustees need to be able to challenge each other and be prepared to be challenged. And one of the things that we put under that kind of lazy heading of founder syndrome is where there's a trustee who can't be challenged. That's really unhealthy, and eventually that will be a problem for the resilience of the charity. But it's also about knowing the limits of challenge, knowing how far you should go, what is acceptable. Part of that is being fact-based. What do you know? stick to what you know. And if facts aren't available, find them out. If you don't know what to do next and you need advice, take that advice and stick closely to that advice. That's a really good way of containing and regulating conflict. It's of stopping it becoming too personal. But that's a key thing. There needs to be civility. People need to be able to regulate their emotions in meetings. There needs to be a consensus that you can contain and manage conflict. Another issue that we see, and a sense of when it goes well, is when staff are accountable to trustees in the right way. It's essentially trustees are delegating tasks and responsibilities to staff, and they need to exercise oversight. But where we see that breaking down is where that oversight isn't properly balanced with a degree of trust. It's like any other relationship. You can't micromanage people. You need to know that you can trust them to the appropriate level, and you need to trust them. Trustees need to be able to ask the awkward questions. We have a board, and they ask us the awkward questions, and that's right and proper. As a member of staff, not always comfortable, but that's the way it should be. But the other side of that, trustees need to take the decisions they need to take. The buck stops with them, and they need to be able to make those decisions. But they need to be as open as they can be about that, and willing to explain those decisions during the process and after they've taken them. Where we see issues are where there isn't that openness, and that can be a real source of problems. We spoke about charity finances. The classic way of things going wrong is where everything is left to the treasurer, and we see that a lot. It goes well when everyone in the charity knows what the financial controls are, knows who the signatories are to the checkbook, and knows where the bank account is, and reads the annual accounts and understands them. It works well when there's clear procedures to cover financial decisions and everyone knows what they are. It works well when no one hides financial information, because the flip side of everything being piled onto the treasurer is the case where the treasurer hoards the information. Again, it's about delegating jobs, but not duties. It works well when charity trustees think about all the relevant factors when they're making choices about how the charity uses its assets. These are some of the most complicated things that you can do, and I think in general charity trustees do a great job in some really complicated circumstances, but everyone has to be involved in that, and all trustees have to have that fundamental understanding of what the charity's financial situation is. So I'll hand over to Neil again, and we'll talk about another case.
Thanks, Martin. It's not the real name of the charity, but you get the sort of picture. So this is an autism charity. So an important local charity, a local facility that allows parents and carers to come along or leave their children in a safe facility. So we opened a previous inquiry about, again, governance issues and internal fallout between the charity trustees and volunteers, which showed they had a lack of policies and procedures, and again, very little knowledge about their constitution. Again, trustee meetings not recorded correctly, and just information shared between Facebook Messenger. So we went down to their facility and met the trustees at the location and spoke to them collectively and had to speak to them separately. During that meeting, it was the first time they admitted they'd ever been in the same room for 3 years. We got the inquiry to a place where they were speaking, sort of, to a level that the charity, we thought the governance had improved slightly, and made some recommendations and checked out to see how well, they had implemented those recommendations. And lo and behold, more concerns, previous issues have bubbled up again. Personal attacks, comments on the Facebook page of the charity, as well as other pages that they use. Confidential information from the charity that's been shared on Facebook to try to attack the trustee and the founder. We got involved. We attempted to facilitate mediation between the local third sector interface and a body called Youth First. We were not directly involved in mediation, but we did speak to both these bodies before they went to charity trustee meeting. Even though the trustees had been told to keep the information confidential, do not share anything, information was shared from that meeting. It was publicly shared on Facebook. Even though they'd been told to keep it confidential to try and facilitate the mediation process. The third sector interface staff members had to take a step back because they were getting bombarded with comments and accusations from one of the volunteers. So what was the result of this ongoing dispute? The facility closed in February 2022 due to personal disagreements between the charity trustees and member service users. Issues like who should have access to the keys, how many keys should we have, where they should be locked, sort of silly things that had exploded into much bigger issues than they ever needed to be. The chairperson was doing her best, but I think the situation was getting too big for her to control and manage. She was sort of known to be the face and the person most associated with the charity, and that was getting difficult because the attacks were getting sort of personal. The facility was closed for at least 6 months to get new charity trustees appointed and new volunteers appointed. The Facebook page had to be made secure because previously it was a good way to advertise their activities, but again, there was more comments, so you had to basically make it secure. Stop more public comments and accusations. There was no police involvement, but it was talked about. So I'm going to go back, that's the wrong slide. So takeaway thoughts from this. OSCR is a regulator, not a mediator stroke referee. I think stepping back now, we probably got more involved than what we should have to try and sort the issues out. We did the best job we could, but it was so ingrained in the local community, and these two individuals had the particular issues that we weren't gonna fix. OSCR can't just swoop in and get involved and fix every issue that can arise in a charity, or more important, the individuals and how the individuals behave, even in a public arena, even in meetings in front of us. It was a little bit like school ground stuff. In this situation, the chairperson, who was getting what concerns were personally about her, recognised that she needed to resign for the good of the charity, step away from being a charity trustee. She could still be involved, but more as a part-time volunteer. Although having a founder and a recognised sort of face of the charity can be a good thing, it can also be a bad thing, and it can also make succession planning difficult when that person doesn't recognise that they can't be around forever to run the charity.
So yeah, that's a sobering story. And I think, again, it illustrates the point that sometimes that there needs to be a lot of input and a lot of help before these charities are able to move on from that kind of situation. I think it's also the limits of what a regulator can do when we're into questions of behaviour and relationships. And fundamentally, that's what a lot of running a charity is about. Both the good things about it and when it goes into difficulties. Really, a lot of what we're saying here hovers around this question of collective responsibility. Charity trustees aren't only responsible for their own actions, they are responsible for the actions and the decisions taken by the charity trustees, the whole group, when they're acting together. That's actually quite a hard thing. It's often quite a hard thing to explain. It's a hard thing for us to sit down in the kind of situation that Neil's talking about, where it's really fraught. And people are saying, but I think this. And it's like, yes, but you have a collective responsibility here. What we're interested in is how you work together, the decisions that you all make together. That's quite a hard, it works great when everyone knows it. And sometimes it works great without anyone thinking about it. But when it breaks down, it is very hard to get people back into that way of working. So what are our top tips around that? Because, I don't want us to go away thinking, oh, what can possibly be done? As a regulator, we realize that conflicts do happen. If you are having an effect on the world, if you are doing difficult things, then it will be difficult sometimes to run your charity. That's part of the deal sometimes, and we absolutely recognize that. When we are looking at whether people have fulfilled those legal duties that we started with, that's what we think about. Those conflicts can be with members, can be with beneficiaries, can be with stakeholders, can be with staff, and sometimes the most difficult situation is where it's around the trustee table. Where it's external, openness is key, and that's why we've got the cute picture of the hedgehog. It isn't good to just sort of prickle up and go into defensive mode. It is good, if you can, to be open to complaints, to have a way of dealing with complaints, particularly if you've got service users, if you're providing services. And I say that knowing that dealing with complaints is not easy. It's not pleasant. I had a boss who said you should treat every complaint as a gift, which I used to hate him saying, but it is right. It is a way of learning. It is information about what you do. Sometimes the dealing with it isn't that easy. It's thinking about how you manage and contain conflict. Can you have those discussions, the tough discussions, the discussions about the difficult decisions, about the bumps in the road around relationships? Can you have those in a way that isn't utterly destructive? And that's really hard sometimes. But I think the big one there, stay as open as you can, stay open to each other, stay open to the community that you serve. That's we're not saying this as sort of some kind of world expert swooping in. That's what we've taken from the experience that we have of these kind of cases. But circling the wagons doesn't necessarily get you through it.